You can hear me?
Thank you. Yeah, you're live. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. For some people, it will be good morning. For some people, good evening. Welcome to this webinar, where we will be talking about the tariff structures for sustainable electrification in Africa. As Fernando explained, there is a reason why we undertook this project, which was done last year for ECI. There is a big interest, of course, in Africa, being one of the continents where economic development has been, in recent years, been very high. Economic development is still at absolute levels, still relatively low, but we can see a huge increase in economic development. And this, of course, logically also entails a large increase in the demand for electricity. Now, if you want to have access to electricity, you need to invest a lot in the power system, and to invest a lot, of course, you will need financing, which means that you need a sustainable rate structure, the capacity of your electricity tariff to generate the revenues necessary to finance investments in the future. So this was the background of the project that we undertook, and today I want to share with you some of the results that we obtained, and hopefully those can be beneficial for you in your work or in your research. So the agenda for today is first a brief overview of the project itself. Then I will highlight the approach that we took. And then the core part of the presentation, I will discuss the results that we obtained for the 5 countries where we did some more detailed analysis. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have some conclusions and recommendations. So to start with the purpose of the project, Fernando already mentioned that. As I said, to have a proper tariff is very important to be able to finance your energy industry, your power sector, and to make sure that demand for electricity is met by sufficient capacity put in place. And this is not only important for on the short term, but in particular for the long term, because as you all know, the electricity business is very capital intensive with very long asset lives, and only having the money to invest in capacity and not having sufficient funds in the future to maintain and to replace the capacity, of course, is not a sustainable way of operating. And finally, number 3, at the end of this presentation, I also highlight that is what is needed to make sure that we can go into that direction, what kind of concrete actions could be undertaken to make sure that in Africa for the future, the electricity sector can also develop. Of course, we only considered 5 countries, not all the countries in Africa, but I think the 5 that we selected, at least for the sub-Saharan, is very representative also for the other ones. So I will briefly go to the approach that we took. What exactly did we do and how did we do that? First, of course, we have to compare the tariffs. We wanted to know how high or how low these tariffs are in the different countries. Tariffs, of course, can be quite complex. You have different customer groups. You have different type of tariffs. The tariff will depend on the level of consumption, and it will, of course, differ between different type of customer categories. So it is obviously not our intention to analyze the tariffs for everyone, but rather for a number of standard cases, which can be considered to be very representative for the typical type of customers that you can normally observe. So we have 4 of them. Domestic, which is just the households. Then we have commercial, small. So this would be something like a shop or a small store. Then we have large commercial, which is things like a mall or a large or a medium-sized factory. And then we have industrial, and industrial is then really an industrial company producing mass production or something like that. Okay. So for these four type of customers, we defined certain consumption specifications in terms of the level of voltage connected, the average consumption in a year, and the level of connected capacity. So based on this, we could then compute the tariffs for the average tariff, at least, for these four type of customers. In doing so, we considered all the different type of tariff elements, but this table gives an overview of what we included and what we excluded. Of course, we included all the normal tariff elements, the fixed fee, energy fee, capacity fee, metering, connection fee, but only connection where it is related to a periodic connection fee, not for the initial one. That one we excluded because that is a fee that you would only pay one time once you get connected. We also did not consider any penalties for overconsumption relative to your connected capacity or any penalties or fees for reactive power. The reason why we didn't include these ones is that it is either something that you pay only once or something that is not very typical for customers to pay. Of course, it does happen, but the majority of the customers would not really pay an excess capacity fee, and reactive power is also very specific from one country to the other, and also relatively low, so we decided not to have those included. Furthermore, when we looked at the comparison, we considered the end user tariff, meaning the final price paid by a customer. So this includes everything: generation, transmission, distribution, supply. We did not distinguish between the different functions, either because the data is not available, or more importantly, because in most of the African countries there is no unbundling yet in place, at least not to a significant extent. So you also don't have separate tariffs for generation, transmission, distribution, and so forth. So we considered the full total price. The price will also include the government fees like taxes, environmental taxes, subsidies, and so forth, but not value-added tax, because value-added tax is something that is very specific to the country, and at the end of the day, businesses at least would not pay such a tax. The comparisons are done on the basis of euro per kilowatt hour. So we use the average exchange rates for the different countries. And as I said, we base it on four type of customers: domestic, small commercial, large commercial, and industrial. So this is the approach that we took for the tariff analysis. In addition to this, we also look at financial performance, because having a high tariff does not necessarily mean that you have good financial performance, and vice versa. Because for different reasons, even if you have a high tariff, and this is something that we will see in one of the case studies, you can still have a very low financial performance. So how do we define financial performance? Here we use the return on capital. In the study itself, we use some additional indicators, but I did not include that here in the presentation because those are quite technical and it would be too long to include in this webinar. But the most important one we look at is the return on capital. The return on capital is a measure of how much money you make by investing in a certain business. So if I invest $100 and each year I manage to get $10 out of that investment, my return is then 10%. This is from an investor point of view, of course. You can also look at the return on capital from a debt issuer, lender's point of view, a bank, for example. And of course, the expectations of the return of capital will be different depending on where you get the money and to who you lend the money. We did not consider the return on capital or a certain benchmark for the return on capital for each individual country, but we just compared those and assume that, say, a return of 10% would be appropriate. This 10%, of course, can differ from country to the other, but it's just as a kind of average level of expectation. It's a pretty good level. Later on in the country studies, you will see this expected 10% reappearing. The analysis was also done, so apart from the 10%, we also considered the break-even situation. So a 10% is you could say a good outcome where financially the utility is performing quite well, very well actually. But for different reasons, it may be possible that you're not actually getting your profit. So it's a kind of boundary situation. We also considered, suppose that the company is not making any profits, so the returns are zero, a break-even situation. What would then be the case? Okay, so these are the two scenarios that we look at. So let's look now at the outcome for the different studies. And keep in mind that what we are interested in is to see how high these tariffs are and how high or how low these tariffs are in relation to the financial performance that these different countries are exhibiting. So we looked at 5 countries, and I will now go through these one by one. So starting with Kenya, just some general background first. Kenya is, as you may know, a relatively large country in Africa, about 40 million population. The electrification rate is about 16 to 18%, so relatively small. And we can also see that the network losses are quite high at 19%. To give you an idea, in Europe, you would see network losses of around 5 to 7%, depending on the country, but 19% is definitely much higher than what you would observe in more developed countries. Energy demand forecast is very high. The energy consumption increases 12.8% per year. That is significant. It's very significant. In Europe, demand growth levels are typically less than 1%, around 1%. So 12.8% is very high. And considering also that the electrification rate right now, 16 to 18%, is very low, this indicates that there is a lot of potential for energy consumption increase in the future. In Kenya, further, just as background, is mainly dependent on hydropower, which means, of course, that the weather is a big factor. The tariffs are set in a relatively independent manner. That is an energy commission. In Kenya, I think that Kenya was one of the first one with an energy commission. And there are automatic adjustments for fuel efficiency and so forth. A relatively well-developed tariff setting system. So what do we see if we look at the tariffs? Kenya is actually doing, Kenya Power then, is actually doing quite well. a rate of return of 8.5%. It's not yet at 10%, what we would, let's say, prefer, but it is quite okay. Yeah? We did some analysis looking at the rates, and you can see, for example, for domestics, it's about 12 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Small commercial, it's 14, and then for the other ones, it goes down to about 10 cents. To give you an idea, in Europe, the prices are about 12 cents per kilowatt hour for domestic. So the tariff that a customer in Kenya pays is basically the same as what a customer would pay in Europe. Okay? When you look at and this is sensitivity that we did, when you look at the situation where you would need a 10% return rather than this 8.5, then you see that a moderate increase of 1.8% of the tariffs would be necessary. So that's not a lot. On the other hand, if you would reduce your tariffs for whatever reasons to get a break-even situation, you can see that the tariffs would be reduced by about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So the situation in Kenya compared to the other ones is, you could say, the most similar to what we observe in Europe, for example, with relatively high returns, and also the tariff level is more or less at European levels. But keep in mind that when we go back to the previous slide, the network losses in Kenya is about 19%. Okay? So you can imagine if you would reduce your losses, you could save a lot of cost, obviously, because losses is electricity that is not invoiced or is not paid for, either because it is lost technically in the system because of heat losses and so forth, but more importantly, and in particular in Africa, the majority of the losses are not technical, but what we call non-technical, meaning that it is either electricity that is not billed, that is not paid, or that is stolen by persons. So this is a major cost for most of the African utilities. When we go to the next one, Cape Verde, which is a set number of islands close to Africa. Cape Verde is relatively small, 500,000 population, but with a very high level of electrification rate, but a very high level of network losses, 26%. Remember, Kenya was 19%. The total installed capacity is quite low, 116 megawatt, some wind, some solar, but mostly diesel, which is over the islands. So relatively many power stations, but very small power stations, and this obviously will have an impact on your cost, especially considering that the main source is diesel. So when we look at the tariffs in see here that these are quite high, 25 cents per kilowatt hour for domestic and 27, 28 cents for small commercial, compared to the 12 cents that we saw in Kenya, for example. So the tariffs in Cape Verde are significantly more higher, almost more than twice as high. But interestingly, the rate of return is negative, minus 10.5%. And the reason for this is two factors. One, the fuel cost, because of the generation specifics in Cape Verde. The diesel cost, in particular, these costs are very high. So even though your tariffs are at a very high level, it still means that you're making high losses. And these high losses come because of the tariffs not being able to recover all these costs. But secondly, and more importantly, when we go back to the previous slide, you see that the network losses are 26%. And of course, as I said before, every kilowatt hour of network losses is a cost that you have, but a cost that is not covered by any income. So this is a direct financial loss for you. And this is one of the main reasons why the company in Cape Verde is having negative returns or losses. If you want to increase your return, you see that the necessary level of tariff is about 10 cents high. So you would need a increase of 10 cents in your tariffs if you were to achieve a return that would be in line with normally expect from a healthy utility. And this, of course, is very significant. Even if you want to do break even, which is this line, then still you would need a tariff increase of about 5 cents. And you can imagine that 5 cents per kilowatt hour is a significant on your customers. Again, here we can say, and this question will investigate a bit more in detail in the next slide, in the further slides, because it's becoming, I think, clearer and clearer that losses, because of you having high losses, you have relatively low financial performance. And an interesting question then is how much improvement could you achieve in your financial performance if you would be able to reduce losses? Okay, let's then go to Ghana. Ghana is a country that is developing quite well recently because a lot of oil and gas, so Ghana is certainly going to be one of the more developed countries in Africa in the future. Quite large population, 25 million, a relatively high electrification rate of 72%. And the reason of this is it was a very aggressive electrification policy by government, which is still going on, by the way. But in Ghana, there's 27% network losses, and this includes both the technical and the non-technical losses. So 27%, as you may imagine, is quite a lot. The Ghana power sector is relatively small, 2 gigawatts. Half is power from the Volta River Dam. And the electricity market is now, you could say, semi-liberalized, where certain customers can buy electricity at deregulated prices, at liberalized prices. So, situation in Ghana. This is the performance for ECG, which is the main utility distribution company in Ghana. The return is 2.4%, so it is above the break-even situation, but still not too high. When we look at the tariffs, we see that these tariffs are relatively, I wouldn't say high or low, it's about 10%, so it's a bit lower than in Kenya, much lower, of course, than in Cape Verde. And considering that in Europe it's about 12 cents, it is below the level in Europe. And a particular thing in Ghana is that there is a strong cross-subsidy mechanism in the tariffs, where the small commercial pay much higher price than the rest. And this obviously is for political reasons to kind of have the business community finance a part of the electricity bill for the households. If you were to increase the tariffs to about 13%, then you would be able to achieve a rate of return of 10%. And a 13% increase, again, is a lot, but relatively speaking, we have to keep in mind that the network losses, again, are very high. So a tariff increase may not necessarily be needed if you would be able to somehow reduce your network losses. So again, we see the same picture of a tariff level that is not, at least compared, it's not very high or not very low. Financial performance could be improved a lot, but the main observation is high level of network losses. Then we go to Tanzania, which is a larger country than Ghana, twice as large. Here we have a very low level of electrification, only 14%. And this, of course, means that there is a potential for electricity demand increase in future, because the lower the electrification rate, the higher your potential is, of course, to grow your sector. Again, we see here 24.3% network losses, so again, very high losses. And in Tanzania, as I think you may know, most of the power is from hydro sources. Looking at the rates, we can see that the tariffs are about between 6 and 8 cents roughly, which is lower than the other ones. Actually, they have one of the lowest tariffs in the group of 5 countries that we looked at. But you can see that the return is also very low at a negative 7.2%, which means that you would need a considerable increase in your tariffs to achieve break-even. So for a 0% rate of return, you would need 27% rate increase. And to come to a situation where your return is at a, let's say, acceptable level of 10%, you would need 64% increase in your tariffs. So that is a very high increase in the tariffs. But again, 24.3% network losses also means that there is a high potential to reduce your cost and to achieve good financial performance through cost reduction rather than through a tariff increase. The final country that we have is Senegal, French speaking, as you know. Here we have an electricity rate of 42% out of the 13 million people. So slightly less than half has access to electricity. And again, the network losses are 22%, which is also quite high. About 700 megawatt installed, a little bit of hydro, and mostly is diesel gas turbines, so 90% is thermal. Interesting fact is that new coal fire is expected to come online. In Senegal, the tariffs are now at a level such that the return is basically 0%. It's a negative 0.1%, so roughly 0%, so they are currently at a break-even situation. But you can see that the tariffs are significantly higher than the other ones, especially for the domestics. It is 18 cents per kilowatt hour, and for the others it's between 10 cents and 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So here a higher tariff has in fact resulted in a slightly better financial performance, or less worse financial performance. But again, considering that, going to the next slide, the previous slide, sorry, that the losses here are also quite high at 22%. An interesting fact about Senegal is that as you can see here, the tariff structure, meaning the tariffs, the level of tariff paid by different customer groups, is more in line with what you would expect, for domestics to pay a high price, and then as you go to the larger customer groups, the average tariff decreases. This is in line with the cost for the different customer groups. For example, in the previous countries, we saw that this was not always the case. And in Ghana, for example, the small commercial pays a price that is very high, artificially high, because of a subsidy policy. In Senegal, it is much more reflective of the true cost. I guess this has to do with the French heritage. The French are very well known for optimal pricing in the electricity business. So my guess is this is the explanation for that. Okay, so we have seen a number of things, and I want to highlight those main conclusions, and then go to the question that I already hinted, which was what to do with this high level of network losses. Is there some way possible to use that high level, or to make sure that you can increase your financial performance not only through a tariff increase, but through cost reduction, and in particular reduction of your network losses, which are in the 5 countries that we saw, are quite high. The first fact we have to keep in mind is that in future, in Africa, and for sure in the 5 countries that we looked at, but I think it also holds for the other countries, is that there is a huge potential for growth in electricity consumption. Historically, we see that demand increase has been very high. It has been at levels that are much higher than what we see in Europe, for example. But at the same time, there is also a relatively low electrification rate, which means that there is a huge potential for demand to increase even more in the future. Of course, whether this potential will realize or materialize will depend on the economic development in general. But looking at how things are going now, we can be quite optimistic that this part of the population that has no electricity at this point in time, in future, will have that and will put high demands on the system in terms of consumption requirements. So there will be, for sure, a large demand to be served, which means that you will need to set in place a lot of investment, and this investment will require money, and that money has to come from somewhere. So this money obviously comes from the tariffs, and when we look at this picture, we see, and this is for all the different countries, on the x-axis we have the average price. So you can see that the price is roughly on average 12, around slightly lower than the price in Europe. In Europe it's about 13 cents per kilowatt hour on average. Okay, so except for Cape Verde, but Cape Verde has a specific high cost because of diesel. Apart from Cape Verde, we can see that the tariffs in the countries that we looked at are for Kenya, Ghana, and Senegal, almost at the European level. Tanzania, they are quite low. You could also see that in the low financial performance. But it is not that tariffs are very high or low. They are at, you could say, yeah, reasonable levels. At the same time, the returns are relatively low. We would expect a return of 10% for a utility in Africa. And this 10% is based on experience. We didn't do any explicit analysis, financial analysis, but 10% based on our experience, 10% would be about the range that you would require the return to be. And you can see that all the countries, the return, the actual return is lower, even for some countries, Tanzania and Cape Verde, significantly lower than what we would desire. So we did some analysis and I said, okay, can we finance the lack in financial performance through a reduction in the losses? And to answer that question, we considered two scenarios, and this is an important observation that we did. In the first scenario, we said, suppose that we want to achieve a return of 10%. How much do we have to increase the tariffs at the current level of network losses? And the results are what you see here. So in Kenya, 1.8%, Cape Verde, 21%, Ghana, 30%, Tanzania, 64%, Senegal, 8.5%. So this means that take, for example, the case of Senegal, that if I want to increase my return from the almost 0% to a good financial performance of 10%, I would need to increase my tariffs with 8.5%. Now, then we said, what would be the same question? How would we answer the same question if we would be able to reduce network losses to, say, 12%? And why 12%? We know from experience that in Latin America, in particular in Chile and in Argentina, Peru also, network losses historically in the 80s, even beginning of the 90s, they were at the level of the countries in Africa, what we see now in the 5 case studies, 20 to 30% in that region. Today, they have managed to reduce these losses to 12%. On average. So 12% is certainly something that could be feasible, in theory at least, and that's why we took 12% as a benchmark. So we said, okay, suppose that everybody, all these countries are able to reduce their losses to 12%, what kind of tariff increase would we require to be at a sound financial performance? And this gives some very interesting results. Here we can see that in Kenya, achieve a 10% return, if you would be able to reduce your network losses to 12%, you could even decrease your tariffs, okay, by 5.4%. The same in Ghana and in Senegal. So the reduction in your network losses provides you with sufficient resources not to even have a tariff increase. Even more, you could even decrease your tariffs. Yeah. In Tanzania, this is not the case, but the reason is that the tariffs in Tanzania are very low, much lower below the cost price, even if you would account for the losses. And for Cape Verde, the same holds, but not to such a large extent. So certainly we can see that the losses has a huge impact on the performance, financial performance of these companies in these countries, and that if you want to increase your financial performance, you don't necessarily need to increase tariffs, but you could or you should also focus on your network losses. So to conclude, the analysis that we have performed, we saw a number of things, and this is very characteristic for the sub-Saharan countries, but I think also for most African countries, is that demand growth is very high. That's good news for the economy, of course, but it also requires that you set in place, that you do a high level of investment to make sure that this demand can be served. Not only is the growth very high, but there's a high potential for future growth because of the low electrification rates. At the same time, we see that financial performance is quite low, less than an ideal of 10% that we would hope for. And we see that the high network losses are really having a big impact on the financial performance of these countries. So our main conclusion is that if you want to achieve a sustainable situation in terms of financial income for the power sector in these countries, then the reduction of your network losses is one of the main strategies that you would need to follow. And this brings us also to our conclusions, our recommendations for the day of this presentation, which is that only focusing on increasing your tariffs to increase the income for the utilities to finance their investment is not a proper strategy. You have to look at both tariffs and efficiency performance in particular, so the loss. One cannot live without the other. There is even a vicious circle, of course, because if you increase your tariffs, you can expect that your commercial losses will also increase because customers can afford less at higher prices. So you have to take these two together. Not only make sure that tariffs are at economic levels, but also make sure that they are at an economic level for a reasonable level of losses. So here is an important role for the utilities to make sure that they set in place proper programs and initiatives to reduce these losses. But even more important is that there is support, the regulatory side, in terms of policy incentives to provide to these utilities to make sure they get the right frameworks and the right support, government support, policy support, to make sure that they are able to reduce these losses. Good. So that was the presentation. I hope you got a good insight of the work that we did and the conclusions that we reached. And of course, if there's any questions, then we can address them now.
Hey, Verde, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. So we open now the floor for questions. So don't hesitate to submit your questions through the Q&A pod, which is on the top middle of the screen. Good. So meanwhile, I will be sending question which is already arrived. So let me send this question to the visible pod. Okay, so the question is, what are the basic indices for setting tariff on sustainable electrification in accordance to best practices? I don't know whether there are basic KPIs or...
Yeah. Okay. To answer that question, actually the answer to that question is that you should make sure that are at a level that is really reflective of the true cost and actually the true efficient cost. So you should make sure the tariff is high enough, that the utility has enough income, not only to invest in new capacity and so forth, but also to maintain that capacity and also to expand in future, to become sustainable financially, not to rely on state subsidies and so forth for its existence. That's the first principle of setting a price. And the second principle is, of course, that the cost that this utility is incurring should be efficient. Because if let's say the CEO of the utility buys a Rolls Royce, then of course the customers would not want to pay for that. So they would want to pay for a level of cost that is efficient and that is reflective of good practices. And a big part of these costs are the losses. So reducing the losses can help a lot to reduce your tariffs.
Okay, good. So we would have another question. Just to have an idea of how much 1% loss reduction might represent. Well, I understand that this is relative to the installed power or the distributed energy, more particularly. Do you have any order of magnitude in mind for the countries analyzed?
We did not look at a 1% loss, but we can get an idea. For example, if we look at, let me just look. I mean, normally you would not look at the 1% reduction. You would say, okay, the cost reduction of 1 kilowatt hour of losses is more or less equal to the electricity cost that you have. Right? That's the idea. But when you would look at the cases where what we're talking about now, then you could say that a reduction of your of a 1% reduction in your network losses would be roughly a bit less than 1% return on your investment. So it is a very significant level of cost. It's about 1% would equal about 1%, yeah, maybe 0.5% rate of return, and that is very significant. Okay. But the exact numbers I don't have. We could compute that, then I could make that available later if you like.
Okay, good. So in any case, the email address of Verde, our speaker today, is available. So if you need further assessments, you can submit the request. Good. So we have a few other questions. So the next question is about private investment, whether it's permitted in these countries, how the payment mechanism is protected for investors. Well, I don't know whether it's really related to today's topic, tariff structures, but well, if you have any comments, Viren, feel free.
Investment. Yeah, normally your investment would be guaranteed by the regulatory policy. If you have a strong, independent regulatory body, that can operate independently from day-to-day politics, then that would be your assurance of being able to recoup your investment. So regulatory institutions are very important to promote investment, because no one will invest if there is not a reasonable expectation of a return on your investment.
Okay, good. So, next question. What is your view on cross-subsidies, for example, when the access rate is low and thus needs to be improved by making electricity affordable?
Yeah, when you subsidize certain customer groups, and in particular the ones who require to be electrified, so the one without electricity, and you want to connect to the system, then normally it is good economic policy to provide a subsidy to these customers, because you're investing in future. You're investing in making available to these persons access to electricity, which they can in turn use to achieve economic development. So it's really a good economic policy. At the same time, you have to make sure that the financing of these subsidies is done in a proper way, because it should not be so that customers receive subsidies, but then the utility is making a big loss, a financial loss, right? So it should be budget neutral. The subsidies should be financed from somewhere outside the company's profits. That's very important to keep in mind.
Okay, good. There is another question about availability of presentation and slides. So if you go to the bottom right corner, you will find a link. So by simply clicking there and then clicking on Browse To, you will have access to the web page where the recording will be made available and also slides. Okay, there is another comment. So it's about adding the EU data, the tariff for different users, as well as the losses. So how, in general terms, how do these findings in these African countries compare to the European average?
Yeah, that was included in the slide. Yes, that's right. Yeah, we did not have that one in the original report, so this is an addition.
Okay, good. Any comment on this? Can you comment orally, or this is something that can be just added later if you have some figures?
Yeah, we can add that later. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Next question is on how to encourage the utilities in Africa to reduce the losses. The maintenance of the electrical network might be very costly.
Yeah, personally, I have worked in a number of African countries, and what you see is that the reduction of losses is the main issue with the reduction of losses is the environment. You see that electricity, the status of electricity is a lot of time it is something like a right, like we have the right to have electricity and we're not going to pay for it, right? So it's you could say a cultural thing in some regions, but in other regions, in Ghana for example, there are regions where this is the case, but then there are also other regions where people just pay for electricity and they appreciate that. So I think a major challenge for the utilities will be to educate the people, the persons, in particular the domestic customers, that electricity is a commodity that has to be paid for, and if you don't pay for it, then then you cannot have it. And so education, customer education will be very important, but they need to have the incentives to do that, because utility by itself will not do it. If he get all his losses remunerated in his tariff, there is no incentive, because he doesn't feel it in his pocket. So you have to make sure that somehow he feels it in his pocket, and then he will take the initiatives to reduce the losses. It's a very challenging task for sure.
Okay, good. Next question is on what base the fixed part of the cost is converted into euros per kilowatt hour, typical capacity. I don't know whether the question is clear.
Okay. Yeah, I think the question is how we converted the fixed fees and demand fees into the average tariff. Basically what we did is we computed an annual electricity bill, that includes all the different fees, and then we divided that by the total consumption in the year. So it is converted into an energy charge, average basically through the annual consumption of the particular customer group.
Okay, good. We have another question on how to encourage private investments in the African context of poor investment. Just to end up with a question of poor financial.
Okay, I think this is related to the previous question of how to protect the investors. If there is an investor with money, what he will do, he will look for an opportunity to invest and an opportunity that will provide him with a certain level of return. If he thinks that there are higher risk involved, or the prospect of getting the returns are not so high for whatever reason, he will demand a higher return to compensate for that. That's basic finance. So what you have to do as a country that wants to attract investment in a particular sector, in this case the electricity sector, you have to make sure that you have right mechanisms that increase the guarantee to these investors. And what are these mechanisms? Regulatory institutions, a strong electricity law, independent regulation, independent from the day-to-day politics. Those are the kind of things that can assure that you will attract the money, because the money is there, and people will invest. But it is not a matter of whether they will or will not invest. The question is, what kind of return do they expect? And if you can make sure that your environment is secure and well organized, and you have strong institutions, then the investment will come automatically.
Okay, thank you. So there is a short question on getting a clarification between difference between technical and non-technical losses. And following on this, there is another question on, based on this differentiation, how does each of these affect the sustainability?
Okay. Okay, losses is normally split into technical, non-technical, that's right. The technical losses you should consider as the losses that occur in the equipment, so in the lines, in the transformers, so all in the network assets. And then the non-technical losses are those losses that are not related to those assets, but basically to to people, to persons. So stealing of electricity, tampering with the meter, not paying the bills, etc., etc. So that's the distinction between technical and non-technical. The non-technical losses, so looking at affecting the sustainability, the non-technical losses are the more important one here, because it is much easier, less costly to reduce non-technical losses than technical losses. You can reduce technical losses also quite a lot, but it becomes more difficult at lower levels of losses. The non-technical losses are generally more easy to reduce because, making sure that customers pay your bill and making sure that everybody is metered is more straightforward than installing additional transformers or additional capacity in your system. So the non-technical losses, those are the more important one in the context of sustainability.
Okay, good. Next question is just again on the level of losses in Europe. What's the average value which has to be compared?
Yeah, that depends a lot from one country to the other, but in general, yeah, like 7% or so in some countries. In Germany, it's even lower, I think, maybe 4 or 5%. But that's the range, around 5%.
Okay, so there is another question on whether there is a threshold access rate above which there would be no need for cross-subsidy in tariffs between different consumer classes. For instance, the case of where the small commercial are highest. I don't know whether the question is clear.
Let me see. Yeah, okay. That is really a policy decision. It's because I think the question is when should you stop subsidizing certain customer groups, and that's a policy question because you could say, okay, we only subsidize customers who are poor. Then you need to have a certain definition of what is poor. You could say we want to subsidize certain sectors in the economy, like to promote the tourism sector maybe, or agriculture. So that's really a policy question. There is no general answer that you can give. It really depends on what the government thinks about that.
Okay, good. There is a suggestion from Tijani about the possibility to develop a working group at a global level with adequate in-class capacity building and site visits, especially for the developing nations, to develop sustainable electrification. So maybe the question can be turned into whether it exists any initiative or any program on capacity building around this topic.
Yeah, yeah. I think that question is more for you. I cannot do it, but I think I can maybe take a role there.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, actually, indeed, there are, especially in ECOWAS region, there is an initiative, the ICRE initiative to develop the sustainable energy in the region. At this point, I would invite our audience to submit a message to the webinar organizers. So basically, you have my email address in the invitations and reminders, and any question relative to these initiatives or relative to how to join such efforts can be properly channeled. So don't hesitate. I will add here my organizers, so you can send me a message. And we would be happy to keep you informed about. Okay, good. So there would be another question. So let me go through it. So basically, the question is about the poor access rates of electricity. So in most of cases, hydropower is the main resource. The question is whether other renewables would be made available for these poor regions. Well, this is probably a bit out of the topic today, but if you have any comment on this, feel free.
Let me see. Yeah, in general, the trend is more now towards renewable energies, really to make sure that your fuel costs are managed properly. You don't have a lot of variance in your fuel costs. So I think in Africa also that trend will come. But when you are very realistic, then I mean renewable energy, the price levels without any subsidies or tax breaks and so forth are still at a relatively high level compared to fossil fuels, right? So I'm not sure if renewable energy would be a real long-term solution at this point, at least, to electrify Africa. I think you really have to go for the more fossil fuels, at least for the time being. Purely from a cost perspective. If there's another environmental perspective, then of course, then the answer is different. But purely cost-wise speaking, I think fossil fuels is still going to be there for some times.
Okay, thank you. So I think we went through the questions. Thank you very much, Verde, for the presentation and the answers to these questions. Thank you to our audience for being there and submitting such interesting question thread. And well, we will talk to you soon again on the Clean Energy Regulators Initiative webinar program. Viren, I let you close the session today.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting. If there's any questions that you have, do let me know. Development of electricity in Africa is now a very hot topic, and I'm sure that in future there will be many more questions arising. So if you have any remarks or questions, do let me know. My email is there, and I'll be available to answer that. So thank you very much for your attendance today.